I texted, "Mr. Robert, please don't call anymore. We've already done 5 rounds, and his wife is too tired and has fallen asleep." After that message, the phone went silent, and the space returned to quiet, but the feeling of unease still haunted me. I used the disposable sim to send another message. "Mr. Robert, I don't want to drive a wedge between you two, but his wife and I truly love each other. You are a generous man. Just get a divorce and let her be with me. If not, how will you face the world when your infidelity is exposed?" This time, he didn't reply. I tossed the torn lace nightgown into the trash, packed my things, and checked out of the hotel, returning to the villa. Everything was as usual. The nannies were tidying up, and the peaceful atmosphere was so suffocating. I washed my face, climbed into bed, and tried to sleep. When dawn broke, I vaguely heard the roar of an engine, followed by the ear-piercing screech of brakes outside the window. I jolted awake. Before I could gather my thoughts, a knock came from outside the bedroom. "Laura, open the..." His low voice carried a mix of restraint, irritation, and a hint of worry. My whole body went cold. It was Robert. Panic set in. Why was he back? Wasn't I just a mere stand-in in his eyes? The knocking continued, a steady rhythm of 3 knocks, as if he was trying to maintain his composure to the utmost. He spoke quickly, his voice heavy with emotion. "Laura, I want to see you." I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, determined not to reveal any weakness. In a sleepy tone, I replied, "Mr. Robert, I need to use the bathroom and take a shower. Please wait a moment." I rushed into the bathroom, turned on the shower to drown out the tense atmosphere, and stared at the hickey on my neck in the mirror. It was a mark I had made yesterday using a bottle, and wanting it to look natural, I had been quite forceful. Now, not even concealer could hide it, let alone clean it off completely. But I still had to find a way to cover it up. Someone suspected of infidelity would certainly react with deceit and concealment. Robert was a cunning fox. I couldn't afford to show any signs of weakness. I wet my hair, trying to create the appearance of just having showered, then put on a high-neck black dress that covered me from neck to wrist. The hickey peeking out from the collar was carefully covered with a band-aid. Looking in the mirror, I practiced an expression that conveyed both guilt and an attempt at calmness. This should be enough to disgust him and prompt a divorce. I opened the door. Robert was sitting on the sofa, eyes closed, brows tightly knit, looking as if he was resting, yet his entire body radiated tension. His face was slightly pale, with a few light stubble on his chin. He wasn't wearing a watch, and the cufflink on his suit jacket had seemingly disappeared. One hand gripped his phone tightly, while the other hung limply over the sofa's arm, his knuckles showing 4 deep wounds as if he had punched something repeatedly, but he seemed completely unconcerned, even neglecting to bandage them. "Mr. Robert, why are you back?" He opened his eyes, his deep black pupils staring at me intently. Leaning on the sofa, he slowly stood up. The man who had seemed so rushed just moments ago now walked calmly towards me. I instinctively took a step back, but he immediately grabbed my arm and pulled me close. He lowered his head, his gaze falling on my neck, his pupils slowly constricting. I forced a smile, trying to appear natural. "Is something wrong?" He didn't answer, only placed his icy fingers on the band-aid on my neck. I froze, feeling as if in the next moment he would violently rip the band-aid off, tearing apart all my lies, and then in anger and humiliation, shred this fake marriage contract. I trembled, closing my eyes, waiting for the moment of exposure. However, his index and middle fingers merely brushed against the band-aid. The movement so gentle it was unexpected. Robert calmly asked, "What happened?" I deliberately avoided his gaze, hesitating to respond. "It's just yesterday I accidentally got cut by a page." "A page?" He blinked, his tone even, but his gaze was icy. "What did you do last night?" His fingertips lightly slipped into my collar. With just a strong tug, everything beneath would be laid bare without any concealment. I swallowed hard, trying to maintain my composure. "Last night I went out to get my hair done." His breath became heavier, the atmosphere weighed down by silence, his eyes boring into me, his expression unreadable, yet his gaze felt like it could burn me alive. In that moment, I felt as if I were facing a wild beast about to pounce. His fingers tightened around my collar, pulling me forward, nearly causing me to stumble into his arms. I instinctively reached out to steady myself against his chest, but his hand quickly wrapped around my waist, gripping me tightly like a vice. The pressure increased, making me acutely aware of the rage boiling within him. My strength was completely inadequate to resist. The arms that had once tried to push him away now felt limp and useless, his breath brushing against my face, inching nearer and nearer. "Mr. Robert, please don't." I trembled, my voice barely a whisper. Even I wasn't sure what he intended to do. An invisible fear made me panic, my mind going blank. 3 or 4 seconds later, he suddenly stopped, relaxed his grip, and slowly stepped back. The hand that had been holding me now clenched into a fist. His complexion was pale, his lips pressed tightly together, not uttering a word. I stood there, stunned and unable to react, then realized I had just blurted something out. I was scared. "Don't touch me," I was pleading with him. He glanced at me, his eyes eerily calm, then his voice, cold as ice, rang out. "I will assign 2 bodyguards to follow you closely. They will accompany you whenever you go out to ensure your safety." Without waiting for my response, he turned and walked away without hesitation. I stood frozen until I heard the sound of a car engine outside, snapping me back to reality as if I had just escaped a nightmare. He wasn't going to investigate? Could it really be like that? I was monitored so closely that I hardly had a chance to touch my backup phone. Laura was working abroad, but this time she wrapped up her work in just 5 days and hurried back. When she returned, the surveillance on me loosened and I finally had a chance to use the backup phone. I messaged with a disposable SIM. "Hey, this isn't a fair way to play. Even if she cheated, a divorce would suffice. Why keep his wife under lock and key?" Laura's reply came swiftly. "She is not cheating. I trust her. Laura is not the type to do such things. I trust her. Laura is not the type to do such things. She is not cheating." I stared blankly at the message. What did he mean? Even though I hadn't actually cheated, what I had displayed was clearly enough for anyone to suspect, so why did he trust me so completely? He had always been indifferent towards me. Regardless, I decided to stoke the flames further. "Mr. Robert, you can't understand your wife better than I. She has 3 beauty marks on her ribs, her navel, and every time I connect those 3 marks into a line, she shivers uncontrollably from the stimulation." "But you are her husband, married for 3 years now. You must have known that long ago, right?" The last sentence was laced with sarcasm, as Laura had never touched me in the 3 years we had been married. Just after I sent it, a loud crash echoed from upstairs, as if something had been struck hard. The sound came from Laura's study. I jumped, hurriedly hiding my backup phone. The banging echoed a few more times, followed by the sound of him descending the stairs. His tired voice instructed the butler, "Have someone clean up, the computer needs to be replaced." His footsteps drew closer, and I trembled in fear, feeling that I might be the next thing he wanted to smash. Curling up in the blanket, I pretended to be sound asleep. The lock on my room door had been broken since he returned. The doorknob was gently twisted. The darkness of the room kept him from saying anything further. In the stillness of the room, the sound of my ragged breathing and chaotic heartbeat echoed loudly, making me fear whether he could hear it. His footsteps drew closer, closer still. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to maintain a steady breath, but Robert neither called me awake nor erupted in anger to question. He stood by my bed. I dared not open my eyes, yet I could clearly feel his sharp gaze pinning down on my lower abdomen, as if he were contemplating whether to check or not. "Don't tremble, just keep acting." Suddenly, the mattress beside me sank. Robert slowly lay down next to me, his gaze like a smoldering fire. I gritted my teeth, deciding to take a risk. In my dreamlike state, I pretended to drowsily turn over and bury my head in his chest. Robert paused, but his expression gradually softened. "My husband," I murmured sweetly. He stiffened, as if turned to stone for a moment. I didn't let go, wrapping my arms tightly around him, continuing to whisper, "Husband, hold me." I thought he would explode in anger, perhaps even slap me awake for never having called him husband before, but he didn't. His initially mocking and cold gaze slowly shifted to something more complex. He tightened his grip around my arm as if to crush it, but when he heard me let out a soft moan, he forced himself to loosen his hold. Robert reached out to hold the back of my neck, pulling me into a tight embrace. He leaned down and gently kissed my hair, his voice low. "Yes, husband holds you." I was left speechless. His strangely calm demeanor was terrifying to the extreme. Robert was exceptionally intelligent. Logically, he should have realized I was cheating from the very first message. To avoid a scandal, he should have quickly drafted a divorce agreement, forcing me to leave empty-handed. Yet he denied everything in an extreme, frenzied, and stubborn manner. He didn't believe I was unfaithful, as if he were hypnotizing himself, stealing the affectionate words. As I thought I had drifted off to sleep, Robert quietly lifted the blanket and placed his icy fingers on my ribs, slowly gliding down along the positions of the moles. Just a light touch, yet it felt like an electric shock coursing through my body. I curled up, trembling uncontrollably. Clearly, those messages were just fabrications of my own making. Even I didn't know that being touched on a mole could be so stimulating, leaving me shivering pathetically. I couldn't pretend any longer and immediately wanted to turn away, but Robert held me tightly, forcing me to face him. His embrace was strong and secure, like a lock, sealing away both my heart and his. His heartbeat was powerful, chaotic, frenzied, intense. His deep voice whispered softly, "You are mine, and I am yours." He had truly lost his mind, devoid of any rationality, clarity, or logic. He was like a wild beast, possessively unyielding. It felt as if I had been dragged into his den, destined to belong to him forever. Robert was not only hypnotizing himself, but was also hypnotizing me. We were no longer sensitive souls, but rather two lifeless iron locks clicking together. Thus, he insisted that I was his, and he was mine. In the darkness, I opened my eyes. His warm arms tightened around me. I stared at his sleeping face. Mixed emotions surged until my eyelids grew heavy, and I finally slipped into slumber. In my dream, I saw myself from 3 years ago, crying and pleading with Robert, "Let me go, I owe you nothing. You have no reason to imprison me." He just stood there, looking at me with a cold gaze. After a minute of silence, he replied, "You owe me. Your sister ran away, broke off the engagement. For the rest of your life, you must compensate me. I will never let you go." At that moment, I collapsed, my hand touching the face that resembled my sister's, finally understanding he wouldn't let me go because he only saw me as a shadow of my sister. 3 years of pain and humiliation followed one after another. The next morning, I woke up. The bed beside me was smooth and clean, as if no one had ever lain there. My phone buzzed, and I received a message. "Do you have any other photos or videos of—" I jolted awake and replied, "Buddy, I'm charming, not sleazy. I have no interest in taking nude photos of women." Another message came in, short but provocative. "Are you using that smooth tongue to deceive her? She's so young, I was bewildered, my face full of question marks. We truly love each other, and where am I small? I'm 23 years old, about to graduate from college." Robert texted again, "Leave her alone. To be blunt, how much money do you want?" I was furious. "I've said we truly love each other. The one who should leave her is you. Name your price, it doesn't matter." He replied coldly but firmly, "I'm not worthy of her love." Reading this message, I let out a bitter laugh. Even if I transitioned into a man, I would still be worthy of love. I recklessly pushed things further, disregarding the consequences, sending a picture of my toned abs and a steamy photo I found online, then send it all to Robert. "Here's my capital, it's quite substantial. Don't worry, your wife will eat very well." This time, there was no sound of furniture being smashed like before. A second later, I heard Robert's cold, mocking laughter from the living room. "Oh, not substantial? Even without seeing it in person, it doesn't look bad in the picture. Vậy tại sao anh lại cười?" Quickly after, my phone buzzed with a new message from him, just one line enough to send chills down my spine. "On the 27th of last month, you or someone you commissioned bought a SIM card in Barcelona, right?" Robert continued, "Do you think I can't trace you using an unregistered SIM? Don't worry, I'll investigate every layer of your skin. It's best if you went to Barcelona yourself. If you had someone buy it, the delivery address will betray you. Go to sleep, my dear friend, but remember to keep your eyes wide open." The phrase, "my dear friend," dripped with mockery and malice. Not one to back down, I retorted, "Of course I have to keep my eyes open while sleeping. That way, I can admire your wife a few more times." Crash! Another glass shattered outside the door. Robert sent another message. "She's just teasing you." I gritted my teeth. "Oh, really? Then why didn't you see if your wife has changed at all lately?" I turned off my phone and regained my composure. How do unfaithful people usually change? I started going to the gym every morning, lifting weights for 40 minutes and then doing cardio for 15 minutes. Within 2 days, the butler reported that the gym was broken. I said it was fine. I would use whatever equipment was still good. He replied, flustered, "Everything is broken. Even the gym door won't open." With no other options, I laid out a yoga mat in the living room to work out. Robert had recently taken to working from home, sitting right on the living room sofa, which made me quite uncomfortable. While I was exercising, he suddenly spoke up. "Why are you working out so much lately?" Just as the trainer on TV was stretching, I followed suit. He stared at me intently, his throat moving slightly, his voice a bit hoarse. "You're thin enough already." I panted. "I want to work out to get a mermaid figure." He asked quickly, "Who said that?" I paused, not understanding why I felt a bit hesitant. This should have been the opportunity to expose everything, but I wanted to hide it as if I were truly having an affair. Perhaps it was because the atmosphere was so good at that moment, so good that it didn't resemble us at all. Robert and I had always rushed to keep our distance. He was busy with work, and I was busy enduring his indifference. We had never shared a moment like this, sitting together doing our own things, yet still able to exchange a few words like a real couple. While I was still in a daze, he quietly said, "Forget it, it's nothing." He easily gave up on asking, as if he didn't need to know the truth. In that moment, I felt something strange, as if we both understood each other, holding on to a fragile thread that connected us. But when I went to the bedroom to change, my phone buzzed again. A message from Robert sent while he remained calmly seated on the sofa. "You bastard, I want you dead." The TV suddenly malfunctioned. Other programs were still watchable, but the workout video wouldn't play anymore. The butler reported back to me, looking awkward. Every morning at exactly 8 o'clock, the whole house was disturbed by the sound of the vacuum cleaner, and I could no longer continue my workouts in the living room. Taking a deep breath, I decided to learn how to bake. When the butler curiously inquired, I simply smiled. Seeing something I made with my own hands being eaten by others will be very satisfying. Robert stood at the top of the stairs, his cold gaze following my every step as I moved back and forth between the kitchen table and the oven. My first batch of cookies burned. I patiently ate them all, sharing the 2 best cookies with the butler while I carefully wrapped the rest in a paper bag and tied it with a bow. These cookies were the perfect testament to the sincere feelings I wanted Robert to believe I had for someone else. Returning to my room to change, I said, "Mr. Robert, I have a group meeting. I need to step out for a bit." Robert leaned against the kitchen counter, his expression emotionless, his gaze fixed on the empty baking tray. He slowly looked up, his eyes dark, but his lips curled into a cold, mocking smile. "All right, go ahead." He turned and walked away. I stepped up to the kitchen counter and froze. The bag of cookies I had left on the table was gone without a trace. Even the leftover burned cookies had vanished. "Robert, I had intended to bring these cookies to the professor and my group mates, and yet you'd thrown them all away." Furious and helpless, I quickly sent a secret message. "Your wife says you've been irritable at home lately. She's very scared, crying every night and missing me. Mr. Robert, why haven't you divorced her yet? What's the point of dragging this out? Is winning and losing that important? She owes you nothing. Your marriage is just a business transaction." His response left me confused. "She's crying." I kept my gaze fixed on the screen. Is this really the point? The point should be the divorce. The next message made me break out in a cold sweat. "I'm also in 9 in district." My heart tightened. How does he know? Before I could reply, he added, "I'm about to find you, you cowardly dog." I panicked and turned off my phone, cold sweat trickling down my spine. I didn't have much time left. I had to act. I couldn't keep probing like this. Grabbing the pre-prepared divorce agreement, I slipped it in my handbag, put on the shortest dress, high heels, did my makeup meticulously, spritzed on some perfume, and stepped outside. "I'm going out for a bit." Boss Tam sat there silently watching me. For the first time in many days, we faced each other for a long moment, our eyes locked. The living room lights illuminated his face, casting shadows on his gaunt cheeks. He looked thinner, his eyes bloodshot with veins visible. He seemed like a candle burning down, both alert and coldly ruthless. "Where are you going?" he asked in a casual tone. "To a friend's house." "Which friend?" He glanced down at the hem of my short dress, his gaze growing dark. "You wouldn't know." I smiled, a calm smile that made the corners of my eyes crinkle slightly. "Just tell me, you might know them." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mr. Robert, our marriage is just a transaction. When we got married, you agreed that—" He stood up, his tall frame measuring 1.89 meters, broad shoulders tapering to a slim waist, like a perfect mobile clothes rack. At that moment, I realized that today Robert was not wearing a suit as usual. Instead, he had opted for a snug black sweater, the soft material stretching over his solid chest. He lowered his eyes, removed the blue light-blocking glasses from the bridge of his nose, and carelessly tossed them onto the sofa. Go on, Van. Let me see how many harsh words you still want to throw at me. His voice was cold, but his gaze bore into me, making me involuntarily shiver and step back. Nevertheless, I tried to maintain a defiant demeanor. I owe you nothing. My sister has returned home. If she knew how you treated me, she would like you even less. That statement seemed to strike a chord with him. Robert frowned slightly. What? I swallowed hard and continued. I have to go. Not just go, I want a divorce. Throwing the divorce papers onto the table, I turned and quickly ran toward the door. Finally, I had said those words. In that moment, I felt a relief, as if I had shed a burden that had weighed on me for years. But that relief quickly gave way to confusion and fear as my hand touched the doorknob. Just as I managed to open it halfway, bang! The door was slammed shut with a powerful punch from Robert. He gripped my hand tightly, his deep gaze intense as he growled, "Do you dare?" His face showed no signs of anger, but his eyes and heavy breathing were unstable, as if ready to explode. I gritted my teeth, trying to calm myself. Mr. Robert, I have someone else now. Get a grip. His facial muscles twitched, the veins on his temples pulsing violently. He stood unsteadily but still held my arm tightly, his tall frame coiling around me like a snake around its prey. His voice became hoarse, repeating a phrase filled with anger and despair. Do you dare? My back pressed against his hot chest, the heat coursing through me like electricity, causing both pain and paralysis. I couldn't breathe, my body stiffened, my mind blank, but in that piercing light, I couldn't help but look into his cold face, wanting to speak, to utter harsh words. But in the end, all that came out was a weak sob. You don't love me. I beg you to divorce me. If you don't love me, someone else will. His breath caught, his whole body stiffened. It seemed he wanted to say something, but all words were choked in his throat. Regaining his strength, he pushed against the door and stood up straight. Before I could reach for the doorknob, he swept me up in his arms. What are you doing? I panicked and struggled, but he paid no mind, kissing me passionately, striding forward, deliberately stepping on the divorce papers at his feet. Divorce? Unless I die? What gives you the right to treat me like this? What gives you the right to be unreasonable? Based on the fact that we are married, for this lifetime you can only be entangled with me. I deliberately provoked him. I like him. I've slept with him. The words tore through the last fragile layer, but his reaction was not the earth-shattering response I had imagined. He slowly unbuttoned his shirt, shedding his layers of clothing. My lips had bitten his until they were red, highlighting his pale, cold skin and the perfect muscular contours of his body, a beauty that truly surpassed the provocative photos I had sent. He lowered his head, his gaze deep as he looked at me. So what? I was stunned. What? His voice was devoid of emotion. You're still young? It's normal to be curious and want to try that. I couldn't believe my ears. His gaze lowered, and his hand continued to remove the last layer of clothing. I instinctively followed his gaze, my eyes landing on a certain point, and I immediately understood why he only scoffed at the two provocative photos. He truly had the right to look down on me. His hand gently grasped my wrist as he leaned down. The distinct, masculine scent of him enveloped me. The stern exterior and cold words were gone. For the first time, I realized that Robert was not just a cold businessman, but also a man full of possessiveness. I stammered, my voice trembling. But all my senses seemed to be under his control, unable to utter another word. He looked at me calmly and said, Van, you're just hungry. Leaving home for snacks is really childish. He gently brushed my forehead, his gaze a mix of tenderness and dominance. Pulling me closer, he gave me a long kiss that left me breathless, almost forgetting my original purpose. Robert wrapped his arms around my neck, the grip strong enough to keep me from struggling. His low voice rumbled, But if you think you can lead me over such trivial matters, that's unacceptable. Mistakes must be punished. My whole body trembled, my voice quivering. Punished? How? He slowly traced over 3 familiar moles. I couldn't bear it, shaking and pleading, but he only watched silently, waiting until I begged a second time, my eyes misty, before he sighed as if forgiving all my faults and leaned down to kiss me, wanting to go deep. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong. The doorbell rang suddenly, shattering the atmosphere. Robert pretended not to hear and continued, but it wasn't long before a knock on the bedroom door sounded. A van? It's me. Boss Tam, are you here too? Robert tightened the bed sheets, his expression so grim it was frightening. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. Was it because he encountered his Bokmoya Kwang that he was so agitated? I smiled bitterly. My heart, which I thought had died, suddenly throbbed with a vague pain, as if I were self-harm. Recently, Robert's clear possessiveness had led me to develop fanciful illusions, and now everything seemed to collapse. A van! My sister knocked again, this time harder, then tried the doorknob. I jumped. The bedroom door had been broken for a long time. Don't open the door. Go to the living room and wait for me, right now, Robert said, pulling the blanket over me before getting out of bed. With my sister's response, he stepped outside. The room fell silent. Only Robert's deep gaze remained, as if wanting to engrave every feature of my face. I sat beside my sister, adjusting the hem of my dress. She maintained her composure, but a strange feeling of guilt surged within her. Robert sat alone on the sofa nearby, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the armrest. Every few seconds, he took a deep breath, as if trying to calm himself. Sister, why did you come back here? I spoke up, breaking the tense atmosphere. My sister cleared her throat, avoiding my gaze, her voice hesitant. Actually, I never went to celebrate our 3-year anniversary. I just traveled alone to distract myself. I was stunned, unable to believe my ears. Too heavy? My sister stammered, unable to continue. Robert clenched his fist, his voice dropping. Miss True, if you have something to say, just say it. My sister hesitated for a moment before uttering words that left me in shock. A van? Actually, I've divorced. I looked at her, my heart racing. That statement made me instantly understand her purpose for coming here. True Havai placed a crumpled divorce agreement on the table, took a deep breath, and looked directly at Robert. Boss Tam, I ran away before, and I wronged you. Now I can marry you to make amends. Please let my sister go. My heart felt like it stopped. This should have been a good thing. Shen Cheng had never wanted to divorce I. Now that he met the real deal, he would surely abandon a substitute like I. But why did I not feel relieved? I watched them, my gaze following every gesture of the two, yet I couldn't understand my own emotions. After a long silence, Robert spoke up, his voice dripping with sarcasm. What? Xiao Hu calmly repeated. I invite you to divorce my sister. Robert replied without hesitation. No need. I looked up in shock at him. His expression remained unchanged, his gaze icy. You two sisters are taking turns marrying me? If this gets out, how can I show my face? Zhao Haiyu quickly explained. I have now obtained foreign citizenship and still use my ex-husband's surname. Don't worry, as long as I don't show up, no one will know the relationship between me and Yvonne. Robert said nothing, his eyes growing colder. She gently pushed the divorce agreement towards him, her tone calm. Mr. Shen, please sign. I owe you and I will repay it. Just don't torment my sister anymore. Upon hearing the words torment, Robert laughed, a sound full of mockery and exhaustion. He leaned forward, his eyes flashing with a reckless indifference, staring intently at Zhao Heyu, his voice sharp as a knife. How have I tormented her? Do you want to ask your dear sister who has really tormented him? His fist clenched tightly, his jaw set, his voice strained as if he were trying to suppress an uncontrollable rage. Why? Why is there always someone wanting us to divorce? Yes, she is the one I forced to marry. I take full responsibility for that, and I accept how she treats me. But what about you? He emphasized, his gaze piercing as if trying to see through. Robert pressed his lips tightly together, seemingly out of respect for my sister. He struggled to use the last bit of rationality he had to suppress even more outrageous words. Truhavi was stunned, and I was stunned as well. He suddenly realized he had misspoken. His gaze flickered momentarily, but he quickly tried to hide his embarrassment. Nevertheless, his words still echoed in my mind. Forced to marry. 3 years ago, the two families, True and Tam, had clearly arranged a marriage. My father had set his sights on Robert, a rising star in the business world, regardless of his humble background, wanting to marry my sister to him. But my sister unexpectedly met a foreign violinist with blonde hair and blue eyes and ran away with him. At that time, I was just of legal, marrying age, and I was forced to become a stand-in, Marrying Robert. What do you mean forced to marry? True have I murmured, her voice trembling, so Yen was arranged by you. No wonder I kept running into him everywhere. I thought it was fate. No wonder I kept running into him everywhere. I thought it was fate. Enough, stop talking. So you never liked me? You deliberately chose someone who resembled my ideal type to approach me. I owe you nothing, and the true family owes you nothing. Shut up. My sister owes you nothing. Robert's chest heaved violently, as if he had just been punched. He looked like a snail stripped of its shell, exposed under the scorching sun, pale to the point of almost suffocating. That's right, my sister owes you nothing. The contract between the two families has been fulfilled, and my sister wants to leave. On what grounds do you force her to stay? My sister continued to condemn him, her words cutting like knives, leaving the man who always boasted in the business world unable to refute. Robert clenched his fists, his voice hoarse, not allowing it. The corners of his eyes reddened, staring intently at True Havai, not daring to look at me even once. I was not stunned. This man had just called me childish, yet now he was acting more arrogant than anyone else. My sister was like angry lion standing in front of me, her voice full of indignation. Do you really think that having money means you can control everything? My sister is a person, not a tool for you to imprison. Robert! If you want to plot and scheme, come to the company and do it. On what grounds do you bully a small student? His face turned pale, mouth agape, but he couldn't utter a word. I also wanted to say that he didn't bully me, he just didn't look at me, didn't touch me, didn't love me, and it was that very thing that caused me pain. True Havai grew angrier as she spoke. Do you see how she lives? The bedroom door has been broken for so long, and your wealthy family doesn't even know how to fix it. The bedroom door has been broken for so long, and your wealthy family doesn't even know how to fix it. The divorce papers she wrote were trampled by you. Have you ever considered her your wife? Have you ever treated her well? Poor Van is so unfortunate that she had to ask me to buy her a phone SIM card. The words my sister spoke felt like daggers piercing the air, plunging the room into a deadly silence. I felt cold sweat running down my back, every hair on my neck standing on end. My mind was left with just two words. All gone. Robert's already weak face suddenly stiffened, his pupils constricting. He raised his head sharply, his voice cold and deep. What did you say? I panicked, my hand unconsciously gripping True Havai's arm, with only one thought in my mind. Please don't say any more. True Havai glanced at me, her eyes filled with a hint of doubt. But then she glared as if looking at a weak child too scared to speak. So now Mr. Tam intends to pretend to care. My sister is so small. Everyone outside thinks she lives a life of luxury, but when I met her in Barcelona and asked what she wanted, she only asked for a phone SIM card. How pitiful, as if she were afraid to ask for too much. That's not true. It's not like that. I trembled all over, not daring to look directly at Robert's face. The room sank into silence, a silence so prolonged it felt suffocating, torturing every last nerve cell. True Havai also sensed the strangeness and, flustered, asked, So how do I ask for the phone? Robert suddenly burst into a short, chilling laugh. It's nothing. His voice gradually deepened to a frightening level. I felt the burning gaze pinned on me, numbing every nerve. He spoke slowly, surprisingly gentle. It's all my fault, sister. I'm sorry. He bowed his head, his unusually gentle demeanor leaving True Havai stunned. Don't act like that. It's too fake. My sister stammered, clearly thrown off by this sudden change. Robert remained calm, his voice soft yet firm. Yes, it's my fault. But sister, there are a few things we need to clarify between us as a couple. Could you please step outside and give us some private space? He coaxed while firmly pushing my sister out of the room. When the door closed, I felt as if my final moment had arrived. Click! The sound of the lock echoed, like the gunshot that signaled the start of a race. In a panic, I dashed up to the second floor, bursting into his room. At first, I simply thought to hide in the only room that could be locked, completely forgetting that there was also a bed in it. But Robert was quicker than me. Before I could shut the door, he pressed his hand against it, stepping in with a deep gaze, locking the door and removing the sweater he had just worn. Before long, he advanced toward me step by step, forcing me to the edge of the bed. I was wrong, I cried, my voice trembling with pleas. Robert, it's too late. Desperately, I exclaimed. I won't divorce anymore. He lowered his head, smirking coldly. Not a chance. He pushed me down onto the bed, his gaze sharp as a knife, staring at me like a small beast, seeking revenge. He leaned down to kiss my neck. Hiding kisses? And calling me brother? You expect me to give my wife to him? You've got some guts, my friend. His kiss was filled with a suffocating possessiveness, as if he wanted to release all the pent-up emotions he had held back for so long. His voice dropped, tinged with a vulnerability I had never seen before. It's not that I don't love you, I'm just afraid that if I say it, you'll respond that you don't love me. I was silent for a long moment, hesitating before reaching out gently to embrace him. In that moment, his spine shivered slightly, as if he couldn't believe the feeling he was experiencing. He softly said, his voice trembling, "Van, can you say it again?" Husband, hug me. No, I laughed and pushed him away. As I tried to escape, Robert naturally refused to let me go, drawing closer until there was no distance left between us. This time, there were no doorbells or interruptions. I looked at the places where I had pretended to leave kisses, now marked by his own kisses as if to stake his claim. I suddenly understood how jealous this man was. The provocative photos I had sent him had been viewed and reviewed until they were etched into his mind. The curtains fluttered in the wind. The sun set and then rose again in the dawn light, and I felt drowsy and dazed. What I saw on his desk was the bag of cookies I had made that day, carefully preserved by him like a treasure. This is where the story ends.